Can you do this in one take?
I don't know. Whether you're doing strength training or energy system training or gymnastics training, at its most fundamental level, you are training movement. And in 2018, I filmed a full comprehensive movement course which tried to help coaches better understand how to manipulate all the different variables of training movement to make people better at all the different skills that exist in CrossFit. So you're about to watch one of the videos of one of the chapters of that movement course. If you want to see the full thing, it is in our TTT classroom. But for now, if you're a coach, enjoy.
How'd he do, Ricky?
Great. Okay. Now that we've covered some theory about movement in the last section, it's time to get more into the practical information of the course. And the goal here is to learn how to actually perform the movement tools. The ultimate way to learn about movement from my perspective is actually doing movement training or picking a skill and trying to improve upon it. I don't think that people can intellectually understand a concept like a snatch or trying to be an elite weightlifter and get better at that skill purely by thinking without actually drilling and working on joint ranges of motion and learning how to coordinate the actual activity. You can't talk about spinal mobility and then all of a sudden do a back bridge. So the textbook style of learning that people use to understand complex things like golf swings and gymnastics and weightlifting and powerlifting, it is necessary. It is necessary to understand the mental component of things, but I feel that the actual training, the actual like being in the trenches and actually doing movement training, and that could be as a coach observing it with somebody else doing the actual activities and cueing them and watching how they change and morph over time, but that process is the thing that actually makes people better at movement. So this chapter will be a categorized breakdown of all the tools that TTT uses to create movement change. We'll cover the tools, how to use them to change movement, some basic timing guidelines, and explanation of how to use the additional resources that we created to go with this course. Before getting into the actual tools of movement training, I first want to cover some basic principles that I've found make people successful as trainees. In the program design section, I'm going to cover these and I'm going to give some other prescriptive guidelines, but I want to make sure that this is redundant because I think that the mind state that people are in when they approach movement training or when they write movement training and how they're executing movement training and how they're thinking about movement training is really important. So I want to make sure that I don't just put it into the course once and I elaborate on it and I review upon the concepts as we go along. So I've taken this big concept of movement training and I've tried to reduce it down to 5 basic principles for you when you're thinking about, writing programs, jumping into movement work, thinking about here's my movement, I want to get to here, and what do I have to do? How do I have to behave in that process or in that journey to get to wherever my end goal is? I think these principles will help people have longevity. I've seen personally that it's helped me reduce injury rates over time. Maybe not like in a short window. If I took a 1-month training block with 10 or 15 different people and I split them up, the injury rates might be the same because they're doing the same activities. But over the course of a 3, 5, 7-year span, when people are approaching their training with this type of a mind state and by listening to these principles, I've seen that they've been more successful, not just in reducing injury risk, but in attaining their goals more regularly. So because people can create faster adaptation speeds by following these principles, I thought that it was important to go into them. So we're going to jump into what these 5 principles are. Principle 1 is that we need to respect individual differences. And by that, I mean people have different adaptation rates to everything. And in a movement context, that means, or why that happens is because people are different sizes, they have different injury histories, they have different sensitivities to the pain response, they have a different level of importance that they carry to whatever their physical training goal is, or how important their body is as a, as a movement machine to whatever their self-concept is. Whatever their outside life variables are, if they have a stressful job, if they don't have a job, if they can, sleep 10 hours versus sleeping 6 hours, the amount of just pure time that they can dedicate to training itself. Age will also play a big role in this. So you have to realize that if all of those things are going into whether or not somebody can adapt to training, then me just writing a training program, me just writing a movement training program and giving it to somebody does not mean that person A and person B are actually going to get the same response and the same adaptation from it. So you have to understand that people are different. And because people are different, some people won't be able to adapt. And I know that's like telling a kid that Santa's not real, or telling something that people really believe in and coming down hard on it. I know that there's a belief system in the physical training market of put in the work, follow these principles, do it intelligently, and you'll be able to achieve your goals. But I've found that that's just not the case. If somebody has had played football and they've had 3 knee surgeries on one knee, then it's possible, I'm not saying that it's a guarantee, but it's possible that no amount of work on that knee is going to allow that person to be able to do a pistol or a shrimp squat. They just might never develop the ability to do that in their movement training. And that's okay, because there's still a ton of other movement options, but respecting that somebody's individual differences are going to impact what they can do long term will allow you not to be dogmatic about what you're writing to them and what you're telling them is possible. Additionally, some people will just progress faster than others, and that goes into all of the variables that I discussed, age, training age, but there are just some people that are built physically better than other people, and those people will adapt more quickly to really any style of training. But if they're really gifted from a movement perspective, then they're definitely going to adapt faster from a movement perspective. So that means your progressions will probably be more quick, your ability to take risks with them will be higher, and just all of that will factor into how the movement training program is going to go with that athlete. Some people need more variance than others. So some people just, whatever, their brains, their minds, their emotion, they could just do the same thing every day for 6 weeks and never complain about it. And if you give the same progression to another athlete 2 days in a row, they might be like, I'm bored, I want to do something else. So you have to understand that people are going to be different. People are going to have different desires to create a different training environment. Some people are going to want to be in a group of people because the group helps keep them accountable, and other people are going to want to train by themselves so that they can be more focused on their own movement, how they're feeling, and what they're doing on a regular basis. So when it comes to movement training, when it comes to all training, I think this principle kind of as a blanket statement is a really good thing to take into your philosophies as a coach or an athlete even, is that everybody is different. So with regards to movement training, our first principle is respect those individual differences. The next principle is cultivate a mind state of progress. And during the course of my career, I've seen a lot of people try to obtain a skill or push towards a goal. And some people, they try for a short period of time and just quit. Others try for a long period of time and just kind of run in circles and never really get close to the skill. Others will work hard towards the goal, realize it's unattainable, and just jump from goal to goal. And then there's a select few that actually obtain their skills, reach their goals, and become masters. And it's really hard to pinpoint what the characteristic is of the people that actually obtain success, but I've seen a lot of patterns with regards to the people that fail. And a theme I've seen in people that don't achieve their goals, or maybe one of the biggest running patterns, is that they let discouragement stop them from trying. They'll start the process, and then at some point they'll label themselves too tight, too weak, too loose, too uncoordinated, not talented enough, busy, or will make some other excuse as to why they haven't succeeded. Basically, they just believe that those states of their body or of their mind or of their life will never be able to change to accommodate allowing them to actually achieve their goal. And there's a concept in behavioral psychology that kind of inspired me to create this principle that refers to people having either growth mind states or fixed mind states. And the research shows that people are more optimistic and achieve more when they perceive themselves as being able to change, adapt, evolve, and get better, and don't put these fixed labels on themselves. And I feel that that growth mind state allows people to continue to strive towards something, and that allows them to keep motivation high. For me, having something to work towards is one of the great joys of life. It keeps me engaged, it gives me purpose, it gives me meaning, and I have seen that people that succeed in actually accomplishing things oftentimes have this same feeling about the way that they construct goals for their day-to-day tasks. So this is why I think it's important from a movement perspective to cultivate this focus on improvement and continually progressing. And if you apply that mind state to the movement tools we cover in this chapter, I think you're going to be more likely to succeed in your movement quest. Some things that you can do to ensure that you stay focused on progress and don't let that discouragement start snowballing and take you away from the day-to-day tasks is just get comfortable feeling like a beginner. I know a lot of times when people are learning new skills or refining skills, they'll get really uncomfortable in their body and just feel bad because it doesn't feel smooth, it doesn't feel perfect yet. And if you just get comfortable saying like, I'm okay being a beginner, it allows you to just continually progress without that feeling of discouragement getting too big. You can also focus on mastery of movement. So that means you never really have movement perfected. It's always something that there's nuance you can find and improve and adapt. You should make sure that you are patient, which means just progress at a rate your mind and your body can take. Don't have any traumatic injuries or experiences where you push yourself so hard that you're so sore and you're scared that you potentially hurt yourself and you feel that your goal is now impossible. Allow yourself the time that you need to incrementally progress at the rate you can. For high-level athletes, that might be a little bit faster than for people who are a little bit less talented and untrained, but just allow the rate that your body dictates to be the rate that you get after. And then most importantly, make sure you work hard, stay disciplined, and maintain a positive attitude. I think if you follow those guidelines and apply them to this principle, you'll be in a mind state that increases your likelihood of success and allows you to have much more longevity with your movement training. Principle 3 is a little bit more practical than the other two principles, and that is protect the spine. It's more related to movement. The US training culture is very explosive and powerful by nature. If you think about all of the major sports, soccer, there's a lot of sprinting, change of direction, violent kicking. In baseball, there's violent swings, throwing, sprinting and change of direction, changing direction on the bases, sprinting from base to base. In basketball, there's jumping and sprinting and jockeying for position, whatever you would call that. I don't know the actual basketball terms. In footballs, obviously there's contact trauma, there's sprinting, there's change of direction, there's impact. Even something like a golf swing is, moving the club at a really, really fast rate. So that means that a lot of the stuff we do in US sporting culture, and maybe it's not the same in other countries if you're from another country, but for most people, the sports that they're choosing are going to be extremely explosive. And because of that, it puts our bodies at risks. We know that from our injury section, if you challenge a tissue in an elongated range to a load that it can't bear, it's going to break or potentially get injured. So the protect the spine concept comes from a lot of movement experts in US training culture, and people call it core stiffness and peripheral mobility, or proximal stability and distal mobility. Essentially, what you're trying to do is make sure that this area, your spine, which also encompasses all of your vital organs, is stiff and rigid when it needs to be. And then if you need to be able to generate a complex pattern that it has a lot of range, what we want is we want to stabilize this portion of our body and then get the movement and the rotation from our scapula, from our hips, and not from our spines. We want to rigidify that so that it's protected. Mobile spines, I think, in certain situations, are necessary to have. I know there's a huge body of research and a huge movement in the training sphere, in the movement sphere, to teach people to rigidify their spines, not hollow their spines out, not do any stretching or any flexibility training, because that destabilizes the spine. And I think if you are doing heavy activities, if you are lifting things up, then yes, doing a lot of stretching and doing a lot of spine mobilizations where you're getting more lax and more free is probably not going to set you up for an injury-free existence. However, I think when you're not doing that, then mobility of the spine is okay. So it's context specific about what the spine actually needs to do to be protected, but being aware and conscious of the fact that your core, from neck all the way to pelvis, is going to contain all of your vital organs, and if you break something in there, it's going to be a huge setback. So having the awareness to say, okay, I need to make sure that I train this extensively, and I have a huge awareness of all of the musculature on the anterior side, on the lateral sides, on the posterior sides, and I know how to protect myself there when I'm moving fast and heavy under load, will keep you safe and keep you progressing for longer. So protect the spine, principle number 3. The next principle is set the ANS for the task. And to understand this principle, I need to give a brief overview of the science and then explain how that's applicable to coaching. And science, for me, has been a really helpful tool in my toolbox as I've developed myself as a coach. But I've also found at times that because I wasn't educated academically in exercise science or neuroscience or all the components of science that underlie the big picture of movement, I can sometimes get trapped in the paralysis by overanalysis type mind state, because I'm searching for a better understanding of all the little nuance and all the vocabulary and all the language. So when I created this principle, I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. So as coaches, I wanted to lay out what I think you need to understand when it comes to the nervous system and its integration into movement. So I have a couple bullet points that I wanted to get across. The first is that the autonomic nervous system consists of 2 major branches, and this is talked about all the time in kind of popular articles or popular podcasts, and those branches are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic branches. And typically, people have an oversimplified view of this, where the sympathetic is the excitatory system or the fight or flight system, and then the parasympathetic is the inhibitory system or the rest and digest system. And the second bullet point is, even though they're part of the same division of the nervous system, they're both autonomic nervous system, they actually have completely separate nerve root pathways. So they act together as one system, but they're actually independent. And I think that's where the oversimplified view sometimes gets lost, where people think that you're either in a fight or flight state or a rest and digest state, and it's kind of this seesaw type environment, but that's not actually true. They're actually operating on more of a gradient. And I think a better way to characterize this is that the sympathetic nervous system is more of a quick response and mobilization, and the parasympathetic nervous system is more slowly activated and dampening. But there are some exceptions to this, like sexual arousal, but I'm not going to try to go into the nuance of the autonomic nervous system. I just want to lay out some of the basics so that people can understand what the ANS is. The fourth bullet point is that the reason why this oversimplistic view of it being taught as just an either or type system is that both systems are activated all the time. And it does kind of work as a gradient where if you are doing sympathetic and excitatory things, you will create more sympathetic tension. And if you are doing more parasympathetic and relaxation-based stuff, you will create more relaxation and lower systemic tension. However, thinking of it as purely a black and white system, I think gets people confused in terms of trying to understand stress within a program design. The fifth bullet point is that breathing and regulation of blood chemistry, primarily CO2, are the primary mechanisms of control. So this is one of the major reasons that in section 8 of this chapter 3 in our movement tools chapter, we cover breathing as its own training tool because it has a direct influence on the nervous system, primarily acting on the autonomic nervous system. The sixth bullet point to cover is that it's still valid to say that you can be in a parasympathetic dominant state, which lowers tension, or a sympathetic dominant state, which increases tension. And that's kind of what I had mentioned in bullet point 4 and wanted to reiterate it because it's a really important concept. So that's all the science that I think that comes to kind of understanding what ANS means when I say set the ANS for the task. Now that I laid out that that's the complexity of the autonomic system, I'm kind of saying throw that out the window and still think of it as a two-system, a two independent internal system. You have the sympathetic system, which ramps you up, and the parasympathetic system that kind of brings you down and regulates you. So if I say that a task is sympathetic and it requires a lot of internal tension, that means that it's going to be something like a linear explosive movement, high resistance motion, something where you have to protect the end ranges of your joints from getting overstretched, like sprinting or jumping or plyometrics, or something that has a lot of high power. And conversely, if I say something like a parasympathetic task, I mean that it requires a much larger ranges of motion. It's going to be slower. You're going to transition slowly. You're going to be more mindful. There's no ballistic type exercises. There's no maximal braces that are required, and you can have more relaxed respiration. So you can see that there are certain tasks that require you to set your ANS in a more excited state, and then others that you can be a little bit more calm and a little bit more mindful as you explore your movement. So the principle's not really about the science that I laid out of what the nervous system is. It's really about using the science to have a mental framework about how to approach a specific movement task. So that way you don't need to go into the complexity of the nervous system to understand the methods and how to apply them. You just understand, okay, this task is really explosive. I'm going to get into end ranges that I need to protect. I need to be really aware and acutely excited to attack this versus, okay, I'm doing this. I need to do some stretching. I need to lower my tension. Therefore, my mind state is more relaxed and I'm getting myself in the mental space that I need to lower tension and be more aware of my breathing and kind of be more calm. And then you have everything in between that gradient of experience. So as you're approaching your movement work, decide what the task is, and then make sure you set the autonomic nervous system for the task at hand. That's this principle. Principle 5 is use pain as a guide. And we talked extensively about pain in chapter 2. And when it comes to training movement, ultimately, each person's relationship with pain will dictate a lot about their experience with training and movement training in general. If you want to push your body to a really far level of performance, there's probably going to be a lot of pain experiences that you have to navigate to continue the progress curve moving forward. And conversely, if you don't want to experience pain and you want a relatively averse relationship to pain experience, you're probably going to have, you can still have a lot of longevity and a lot of happiness with your body, but the movement complexity, intensity, endurance that you develop is going to be on the lower end of the spectrum. So pain is a really important relationship that anybody needs to evaluate with regards to their own movement if they want to get better. And before I kind of dig into this principle, one thing that I wanted to say is that as a liability caveat, there are some things that are within your scope of practice as a coach and as a movement practitioner, but pain is one of those things that's kind of on the fringes. And if somebody is experiencing pain, if you're not a physical therapist or a chiropractor or an orthopedic surgeon or somebody who has the credentials and the experience and the authority to give medical advice or be able to diagnose issues, then you're not trying to tell somebody, hey, you didn't tear a ligament, therefore you shouldn't be experiencing pain type thing. You need to operate within your scope of practice. And I don't want this subsection of the video to make it sound like I'm saying that as coaches, we need to be stepping farther out of our scope of practice into the medical field. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying as a coach, you need to be able to help people navigate their relationships with pain. And I wanted to just put that caveat in the front of the video, A, to protect the brand, and B, to protect you from a liability perspective. If you are a coach, you don't want to get into a position where you tell somebody something that you're not legally allowed to tell them. Okay, so with that caveat out of the way, I also don't want to be the guy in the market that's saying better athletes are just better at dealing with pain, or survival requires you to cope with pain, or pain is part of life, so get over it and move on. Don't be a baby. This aggressive approach to pain is something that I used for myself in the past. And with experience now as a coach and with hindsight, I've realized that it was a pretty stupid approach. When I compare the gains of the athletes that I have that take a more mindful approach to pain, that we navigate, that we say, okay, you're in pain, let's move around this, let's do isometrics, let's treat it with the appropriate care and respect that we should, I've realized that people are able to have much more longevity with their training and not have major setbacks or major catastrophic injuries that happen on a more regular basis. So even though I do believe that it is true that you need to be more resilient to the pain experience if you want to have a high degree of movement complexity, I also know that there is an appropriate amount of adaptation that is required in your biological systems to develop that coping capacity for the pain experience. So this principle is more about developing a healthy relationship with pain. One that's not 100% pain avoidant, and one that's also not 100% pain seeking. One where you have the ability to discern whether something is really going to damage your health or whether you're just talking about some discomfort. And obviously that will change over time. Sometimes you'll be wrong about the experience, but I think it's really important to start that dialogue. And in starting that dialogue, I had a couple bullet points that I wanted to get across that I found from my own experience as both a coach and an athlete. The first is that as you work with people, you are going to realize that everybody has their own sensitivity or insensitivity to pain. I don't think it's smart to try to force people to experience it differently. Don't just not respect somebody's pain. I think it's important to say, regardless of where they are in their development, if you're an advanced athlete and you have been through tons of surgeries and injuries and muscle pulls and muscle tears and really bad DOMs, then your experience is going to be very different from a novel trainee or somebody who's just getting into training. So you need to be respectful of that and allow them to develop their process over time. The second is that pain can be very useful to guide a session's training for the day. If you're experiencing pain from yesterday's training or from 2 days training, you can use that pain as a barometer for your recovery from those previous training stressors, and can be something that is very useful in guiding day-to-day effort levels. The third thing that I think pain can be used that is helpful is that it can bring awareness to a movement pattern. Pain generally as a threat response will tell you okay, well, this is pinching here, so something is tight or something is overly loose or something is overly stable. And inherently, there's something that the pain is telling you that if you can go inward and you can investigate, that pain response will give you cues as to how you need to manipulate your movement over time. As a movement coach, oftentimes you're walking through that with people. So as long as you know there's not a major injury, somebody's like, I feel a little bit of pain when I do this. Say, okay, here, try putting pressure here, try putting pressure here, trying rotating your arm here, try, doing a 5-second isometric here, try tightening down your rib cage here. And as you investigate and explore that, sometimes the pain response is taken away and they have these aha moments where the pain actually brought the awareness of how they need to move in a more safe environment. So that's one practical way that you can look at pain as a more positive thing. So that perception of looking at it positively instead of negatively, I think ultimately will positively change your relationship with pain itself. Okay, moving on, 4th bullet point. People are not always accurate in determining what they can handle from a pain perspective. So a lot of times people do a training session, you ask them, hey, how was that? Oh, it was a 7 out of 10 effort. Then they wake up the next day, you ask them how they feel, and their body is absolutely destroyed. They can't walk, they can't sit down, they can't move, they can't tolerate the pain. So in my head, the way that I classify that is that the athlete did not have the self-awareness to understand what the true effort was on their system when they were doing the task. And then after the adrenaline wears off and they eat and they sleep and they become more in tune with their system again, the pain is so overwhelming that they actually misclassified what they could handle from a physical perspective. Therefore, I might write in a training prescription moving forward, hey, for that person, I want you to do this at a 5 out of 10 effort, even when I want them closer to 80% effort, because I know that their understanding of what they can tolerate and how those pains will manifest after they put that stress on their body, what that process is going to look like. 5th bullet point. Sometimes a pain can be reduced to accomplish a training session with breathing drills, which we'll talk about in this section, with different bracing strategies, which is something that, again, is an exploratory thing. So tighten this up, brace your arm. Sometimes the pain response can be instantaneously changed with just different tension cues and manipulations, or altering the movement. And altering the movement is something like, hey, this person wants to do a deadlift. If they can't do that deadlift, for example, you might find something like a different hinge variation, which you'll find in our movement variation playlist on YouTube. You can do single leg RDLs, or you could do sumo pulls, or you could do partial pulls from blocks, or you can do good mornings, or something that allows you to still get that gross motor pattern, but potentially not do it under pain, and then work on the movement pattern from a pain perspective in a different training session. Okay, 6th bullet point. And this is our final bullet point, and I think probably the most comprehensive and most important, is that people are going to look to you to set the example for your culture. So I think you should continue to develop your relationship with pain, and most importantly, continue the discussion within your community. I think it's important to constantly push the dialogue about the psychological and emotional states that impact pain. So just how people perceive pain, perceive stress, their self-acceptance about what's going on in their body, dealing with fears. So sometimes people will have a pain and then they'll be like, oh, what does this pain mean? Do I have cancer? Do I have a tumor? Did I tear something? And they'll start to go way too far in the future in terms of dealing with what they're dealing with from an experiential perspective in the moment. And I think that's the most important aspect of dealing with pain, is you have to be in your body to experience it and understand it and figure out how to take action moving forward. Dealing with frustrations, dealing with relationship health, pressure people are putting on themselves, that psychological and emotional aspect of this is extremely important, and people need to be aware that that is influencing their pain experience. Then obviously the physical stuff, so movement patterns, imbalances. If you have a PT or a chiro or somebody that you trust that you could refer to with regards to those issues, I think that would be really helpful. Sleep plays a major role, hormones play a major role, digestion plays a major role, behavioral stuff, insecurities, losing, all of that is extremely important when you're trying to set the tone for your culture moving forward about how to react to difficult and painful situations in the body. Pain's just part of life, and with regards to training, it's going to be part of the process. It'll be present in everybody's training career. I've never met a single person that has had no pain when it comes to their body throughout the course of their life. So I've found that the way you think about things really changes how you experience them. And one of the most valuable lessons that I've learned was to view pain as a guide more than think about it as an enemy or an obstacle that was getting in the way of where I was trying to go. And that shift in perception was a major, major, major positive tool for me to overcome some of the physical pains that I was dealing with and to really relearn how to use my body in a much more different and enjoyable way when it came to training. So I hope that you can use this principle to avoid the trap of thinking that all pain is bad and can learn for yourself how to cultivate a relationship where you think of pain as a guide more than as a threatening experience that's taking away from your ability to enjoy your body and life. If you're like most people, when you think of movement training, two things probably come to mind. On one hand, you'll think of elaborate skills you see in advanced athletes training. Backflips, handstand walking, advanced gymnastic skills, huge weightlifting metrics, explosive jumping power, or yogi-like flexibility. On the other hand, you'll think of the type of training you do when you're injured, where you're forced to slow down and rethink the way that you move, where you must be careful, slow, challenged to be still, fight your feelings of boredom, and perform what many people consider to be monotonous rehab exercises. But that's not really an appropriate way to think about movement training if you want to become a successful, long-lasting coach. It can't be an afterthought. It's not something you start thinking about only when training high-level athletes or when someone gets injured. Movement training has become a vital part of my coaching framework, and that is why I created this course.